Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to invite everyone to join this third day of session. Basically, we are looking into experience sharing and learning from mentors about clinical trials and their experience, mainly looking from the practical point of view, then actually a regulation or theory part. So with that, we'll start today session. And this is a great honor and privilege to invite Sir, Dr. Sudeep Gupta, Sir. Sir is we always want to hear out, and it is always a learning experience for us. Sir doesn't need any introductions, so I will ask Sir to take the session and give a few words of instructions to new trainees and our people like in our age where we want to do trials and get an experience of these things. I'm handing over, Sir.
So thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I can give no instructions and no learning to anyone. I'm still learning myself, and I enjoy learning with students and with other young people. They are much smarter than me. Today in this presentation, I will share a little bit of my thoughts as well as experience regarding interim analysis, including interim analysis of clinical trials that is mandated by the data safety and monitoring committees. I would like to thank Dr. Parikh for this invitation. This is a topic that I have worked in a little bit, so it's a pleasure to give this presentation, and I now hand over back to the organizers so we can begin with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation to deliver this talk, which is on preparing for an interim analysis based on DSMB recommendation. I will try to describe what an interim analysis means, why it needs to be done, why, very importantly, multiple looks at the data can be problematic, and consider some common analysis and designs that incorporate interim analysis. Interim analysis is also sometimes called data-dependent stopping or early stopping, but of course those terms do not encompass the entire remit of interim analysis. The bottom line is that a trial should not be simply continued because it was begun, but careful thought should be given to continuing a trial versus the option of stopping it early based on interim looks. There are several issues that are involved, which are ethical, the precision of the results obtained, the data quality, and several others that I will have the opportunity to discuss. Usually, we use accumulated data at an interim time point to decide what to do next, and this is the essence from other studies or meta-analysis is brought to the attention of investigators that encourages them to undertake an of the unanticipated at the interim look called overwhelm. overwhelming efficacy or detriment. The treatments are found to be convincingly not different, called futility, because of the unanticipated side effects or toxicities of the study treatments, poor data quality, slow approval. As I said, definitive information becoming available from other studies that make this trial unnecessary or unethical, the scientific question no longer remaining important, low adherence to study treatment, and rarely the study integrity being compromised by either fraud or misconduct. So we have to consider, apart from the statistical considerations, all the various factors that are listed on this slide at the time of interim analysis, and then take a considered decision whether to continue the trial or to terminate it. And I will have the opportunity to discuss mainly the statistical aspects of interim analysis in this particular often definitive large phase 3 randomized trials have inbuilt data safety and monitoring mechanism in the form of a DSMB. These are independent multidisciplinary experts. Their goal is to ensure that the trial continues to be safe for patients and warrants continuation, and they undertake qualitative and sometimes quantitative review of accumulating data, including adverse events at various time points during the conduct of the trial. At the time of interim analysis, there are several motivations to terminate the trial and others to continue the trial. Termination can be useful because it can minimize the size of a trial, minimize the number of patients who are on a potentially inferior arm. It can control the cost and economics of a trial. And of course, the results can be communicated in a timely manner. But on the other hand, continuation of the trial is also attractive because with increased sample size to the predefined value, there is increased precision, reduction in errors, increased power. Very importantly, the increased ability to look at subgroups, which opportunity may not arise again, and also gather informations on important secondary endpoints, which may be inadequately done if the final sample size is not accrued. I must emphasize here that statistical considerations are not the sole basis for decision to stop or continue a trial. It is only one of the inputs in that decision. Like I said, there are several other considerations like the toxicities of treatment, the availability and usefulness of alternative treatments that may have become recently available, the seriousness and the rarity of the condition being treated, the acceptability of the treatment or the study to the patients, as well as other findings. So let me now discuss a little bit about statistical considerations in an interim analysis. And because I have only 15 minutes, of necessity, I can only undertake a very superficial review. So at an interim time point in a large definitive phase 3 trial, the question from the statistical point of view that needs to be answered is the following. At this point in time, is there statistical evidence that one arm is clearly more effective than the other? In other words, overwhelming efficacy. Number two, one arm is clearly dangerous or unsafe. In other words, overwhelming detriment. The third, the two treatments have such similar responses at this interim time point that there is very little probability that a significant result will emerge in the end. In other words, futility. Now, all these questions need to be framed in a statistical framework, and then they need to be answered using appropriate techniques. It should also be understood that at their very best, interim analysis are difficult because they involve fewer data points. The inferences can be imprecise with an increased chance of error, and therefore the decisions to stop a trial are taken only when there is strong evidence in one or the other direction at the interim time point. This is an example of one study where an interim analysis could have been done. This is the study of streptokinase in patients with myocardial infarction. The final trial with 17,000 patients showed a highly statistically significant benefit of streptokinase with a 2.8% improvement in death rate. Now, in this study, streptokinase had shown a trend towards betterment early on in the trial, but the trialists decided to continue to accrue into the study. And finally, this was a practice-changing study because of its sample size and because of the precision of its results. Earlier studies of streptokinase had shown similar results and yet had little impact because they were either stopped early, they had smaller sample sizes, and therefore their results were not as precise as this particular study. So there are three main schools of thought or methodologies for undertaking interim analysis: the likelihood methods, the Bayesian methods, and the frequentist methods, which differ in their approach. We are all familiar with the frequentist approach because it is statistically and mathematically less rigorous. Not less rigorous, it is less difficult. It is as rigorous as the other ones, but it is less difficult. And therefore, I will briefly comment on some of the main points about how to undertake an interim analysis from the frequentist point of view. The issues that arise are multiple looks at the data and why they can be problematic and how to control those problems, and then several designs including stopping boundaries and alpha spending functions by which we can undertake interim analysis and yet not inflate the type 1 error in a study. And of course, we can also have adaptive 2-stage or 3-stage designs that include multiple looks at the same data as it is accumulating. So why is multiple look an important issue and why can it be problematic? So for example, if I have a study where I'm accruing 100 patients in each arm and looking for an improvement in response from 30% to 50%, why can't I look at the data when 30 patients are accrued, and if the p-value is less than 0.05, call my trial positive and stop the trial? Why can't that be done simply in that manner? Well, every time we look at the data and consider a test of significance, we introduce the chance of falsely rejecting the null hypothesis. In other words, every time we look at the data, for example, at the 0.05 alpha level, we introduce the chance of a type 1 error. And when we do it several times, the type 1 error accumulates. So without going into the mathematical construct of why type 1 error accumulates because of the paucity of time, let me say that the more number of looks we have at the data, the type 1 error keeps getting inflated, and therefore one cannot simply go on analyzing the data again and again. This is the type 1 error in the right hand column based on the number of looks on the left hand side, and you can see that the type 1 error significantly increases with the number of comparisons and number of looks that one performs. And essentially, in their very essentials, group sequential designs are methods to control the overall study type 1 error at a predefined level, so as to hold that error level while allowing the investigators to have multiple looks at the data. And if I was to use an analogy, I have 5 rupees in my pocket. I have only 5 rupees to spend. I can spend it all at once. I can spend it on 2 occasions. I can spend it on 3 occasions. And how much I will spend on each occasion is defined by these group sequential designs. So these are the common methods which are used to design interim analysis: the Pocock method, the O'Brien-Fleming method, the Peto method, etc., and so on. They differ essentially in how they allow the investigators to spend the alpha at the interim looks. Generally, they make 2 assumptions: that the number of interim analysis will be predefined ahead of the analysis being conducted, and second, that there will be an equal number of individuals enrolled and information at the time of each look. These conditions are not always satisfied, as I will have the occasion to show you, but nevertheless, most of these methods operate broadly on these assumptions. One important aspect of interim analysis is the difference between calendar time and information time. So essentially, all these methods operate in information time, which means what fraction of the final sample size has been accrued, what fraction of the final anticipated number of events has happened. So the x-axis is not calendar time, but information time. And if I was to show the difference between Pocock and O'Brien-Fleming, on the y-axis is alpha and on the x-axis is information time, you can see the dashed line is the O'Brien-Fleming, and very little alpha is spent at the earlier looks, most of it being reserved for the final look at the data, whereas Pocock spends the alpha or the 5 rupees in my pocket more evenly over the several looks that we have at the data. But nevertheless, both of them end up spending an alpha of only 0.05 so that the study level type 1 error is not inflated. This is an example of a very famous trial of propranolol versus placebo in patients who had myocardial infarction. There were 7 meetings of the DSMB and 7 interim analyses which were scheduled and planned to review the interim data. And you can see that at the first 5 looks, the results of the interim analysis did not breach the O'Brien-Fleming boundary, that is the sloping curve from the top left-hand corner. But at the 6th look, the study results breached the O'Brien-Fleming boundary. The study was stopped and terminated, but crossing this boundary was only one of the factors in this decision. And we know that there was a significant and clinically meaningful improvement with propranolol in terms of mortality after heart attack. Our own study led by Dr. Anil De Cruz in head and neck cancer had a similar conundrum. So this was a study of elective versus therapeutic neck dissection in patients with clinically node negative oral cancer. Trial was originally designed to prove a 10% absolute improvement in overall survival from 60% to 70% between therapeutic neck dissection, which is dissection at the time of relapse, versus elective neck dissection, which is dissecting a clinically node negative neck at the time of initial surgery. And the alpha was 0.05, statistical power was 80, the original sample size was 710. This calculation accounted for 1 planned interim analysis at the alpha level of 0.001. However, in 2011, 7 years after starting the study, a meta-analysis was published suggesting that elective neck dissection resulted in superior overall survival. So an unplanned interim analysis had to be conducted. The study was continued because the results did not meet the predefined stopping criteria. 3 years later, the Data Safety and Monitoring Board looked at the number of deaths in the 2 arms and said that there seems to be a difference between the 2 arms. So therefore, please conduct another interim analysis. And the ethics committee suspended trial recruitment from 1st July 2014 and permanently terminated it in December 2014 based on the results of this interim analysis. So this analysis was conducted after the first 500 of the 596 randomized patients had completed at least 1 year of follow-up. 129 events had happened at this point of time. And we had to recalculate the O'Brien-Fleming spending function to allocate the alpha between the first analysis in 2011, which had already happened, the second analysis in 2015, 14, and the third and the final analysis which would happen in the future, and the nominal alpha allocated to the 2014 analysis was 0.027. The trial, the results of this trial, the interim analysis, made it to the plenary session of ASCO and to NEJM and showed that overall survival was significantly superior with elective surgery compared with therapeutic surgery, with a p-value that breached the predefined O'Brien-Fleming spending function. The disease survival was also better. The protocol had to be amended on a number of occasions because of these interim analysis, and the full evolution of this trial and the protocol as it happened is a part of the record on the NAGM website. We had to convert all the tests to two-sided based on the NAGM reviewers' input. Interim analysis can also be conducted for futility. I will not go into the details of how that can be done. We use conditional power as one of the methods. Interim analysis should contain, in addition to the statistical aspects, information on all these other factors that are listed here on this slide. An interim analysis can have very important consequences, including terminating a trial, as you saw in the elective neck dissection study from Tata Memorial. It can lead to unblinding of the code. It can lead to a modification of the informed consent form. It can lead to re-estimating the sample size. So it should never be taken lightly, but with due care, consideration, and rigor. The bottom line is that investigators need to plan the interim analysis at the time of initial conceptualization of the study, and also that there is no free lunch. There is always some penalty to be paid for looking at the data at multiple time points with multiple analysis and terminating a study early. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. I would.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
I will. There's no questions from the thing, sir. So I would call our next speaker, Dr. Krishna Kumar, sir.
Yeah. Hi.
We'll be talking about the preparations required for a US FDA visit. Dr. Krishna Kumar, sir, is working currently in Madurai in Meenakshi Mission Hospital. Dr. Krishna Kumar, sir, can you take over?
Thank you, Vinayak. Thank you, Purvish, sir, for this nice opportunity. I'll straight away to my talk, the 15 minutes talk. So I have just run through what I hope my slides are visible. Are my slides visible?
So your slides are visible, so but so your voice is breaking in between.
Voice now is it heard better?
No, sir. It's still voice is breaking.
No, okay, sorry. Okay, I will another audio.
So can I switch off your video, so it's showing low bandwidth here? So I'm going to so can you try talking now, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah,
no
so I'll just
problem.
stop
Now is it heard better?
Yes, I've just stopped your video, so it should be better.
Is
now,
this
sir.
fine?
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
better.
are
Sir.
you able to hear me better now?
Yes, sir, much better, sir.
Thank you. So I would be, it's a short presentation. I'd just go through the steps of a routine FDA audit and then share our experience. So we gained this experience from the last couple of audits which we had in the few years ahead of my lecture now. So basically the FDA inspection program, also called as the Bio Research Monitoring Program, the BIMO, it is basically done to ensure that if you see the primary goal, it is there to ensure that the human rights and the welfares and the safety are also to see whether the trial's data has its own accuracy and reliability, and whether they have gone according to the regulatory complaints which has been laid down by the FDA. So this BIMO inspection, actually, it is not a fixed one. The FDA inspection can last anywhere between 2 days to even sometimes up to 10 days. And this is the brief process. So the FDA inspection, you have the FDA office, and that selects a particular site and contacts that particular site that there is going to be a scheduled inspection. And then the faculty from the FDA, they arrive at the site, they review the records, they interview the investigators and the staff who are there in the study, and then they present all their findings and they finally depart. And after they depart, there is something called as a written report, the EIR, and basically sometimes it is generated and given, and sometimes it is not a must that the EIR is always issued by the FDA. So what happens is, the first thing that happens is the PI of the particular trial, he is notified. So the FDA coordinator contacts the PI and says that there's going to be an inspection, and this is usually scheduled well ahead. Actually, in our experience, we had the notification given almost about 2 months earlier, but you'll also have to remember that if there are certain indications, they may even come unannounced. And what do we need to do? See, I am quite sure that we have a good set of eminent researchers here in our group, and you would be running a lot of trials simultaneously. Once we know that the FDA is going to come, we have to familiarize ourselves with the regulatory guidelines. We have to go back to the protocol, go through the protocol, the study procedures, because what we have to remember is many times these inspections come way after we stop recruitment and do the trial. So we will have to familiarize ourselves with what happened in the study and make sure that all the study documents are in place, the regulatory binder is in place, and then the subject research files for the completeness of all the ongoing trials. We will have to inform our medical records department that the FDA inspector will be on site and he may be asking for records, and as and when he asks, the process should be expedited. And then there should be a clear, good room which has been with an attached, personal hygiene activities where the inspector can be comfortably seated to have all the processes done. And this is something, there are sometimes the FDA inspector keeps asking, he needs a copy of that. So if you have the facility, it is better to have a photocopy machine placed in the same room, so that as and when certain documents are asked, they may need to be photocopied. And what does the inspector actually look for? See, as soon as he comes, he displays the FDA 482 form, which is basically the notice of inspection to the clinical investigator, and says, and to show that he is the authorized person. Site related, he would like to inquire about the site process for the particular study concerned, how the subject recruitment took place, the facility tour, information about the locations where the subjects were examined during the trial. He will look into the complaints with the use and the handling of the investigational products. Next, he goes into the data documentation in detail, whether the accuracy and the reliability of data can be there from how it has been documented on your source as well as the CRFs. He will compare the data available at the site to the data which has been filed with the CRF. Sometimes it's an eCRF or sometimes the paper CRF, whichever has been filed with the regulatory agency. He can interview the individuals involved in the conduct of the study, not just the PI. The entire team may be interviewed. He may look whether the appropriate delegation of the various study tasks has been done correctly by the PI to the respective people, whether the correct training of the individuals has taken place. So the training log is very important. So before the trial has started, he has to make sure that the training log is in place. The ethics committee, the IEC and the IRB submission, the approval communication history, the approval of the protocol, the informed consent documents, and also the patient diaries, whether all are in place. And then the FDA 1572, which is usually the form which is downloaded from online, the financial disclosures, the CTAs, and other investigator-related agreements. So the FDA inspector basically has his own checklist, and he will be going one at a time and will go through all these things. Whether the applicable procedures and the SOPs at the site have been done properly, those records. See, so many times the CRFs are perfectly written, but when the inspector comes and he asks for the source records, which are basically your medical record, hospital records, the lab reports, and the subject diaries, it may go missing. So it's very important that the source records are in place, the signed original informed consent forms, whether the protocol complaints and the documentation of deviations, whether it's a major deviation or a minor deviation, whether all that has been appropriately recorded, whether the events, the adverse events, the serious adverse events, whether all of those have been reported as per timeline and as per the correct regulatory SOPs has been taken, cognizance. All that would be seen in detail by the FDA Inspector. And there is something what we know in all the audit, they would go through the source document, see how we have documented about counseling the patient regarding the rights, the safety, and has provided the initial and continuing review of the study even after the study has started, who has performed the inclusion-exclusion criteria for the particular trial, who obtained the informed consent, whether it was a part of the team, the delegated person, who has actually collected each adverse event data. So this particular part has been done meticulously in all the trials. And whether this informed consent is a voluntary process. So they are very particular to note even the smallest wordings in the source document. In fact, this was pointed out during one of the trials, because I can share this experience. What happens is, as investigators, when we go through, let us say, a particular trial, let us say if it was a trastuzumab trial, we have the habit of saying that, writing on the source document that this patient is probably a trial candidate or for trastuzumab trial. This is something what the FDA inspector in one of the trials said you cannot do. It is, he says that you are prejudiced. You have already said or decided that this patient will go into the trial. So I would then from there on, we were very careful. This happened in one of the earliest audits, although it didn't come as a 483. This was suggested by the inspector himself. Even if you identify a subject as a potential candidate, do not document it in the source document ahead of giving the informed consent process, or the audio video consenting, or the audio consenting, or whatever, depending on the hospital's SOP. Do not mention this on the case sheet. That means there could be an element of coercion on the subject that he has to go through the trial. This is how the FDA views it. What language was the informed consent given? And if suppose the patient is illiterate, whether the LAR, that is the legally authorized representative, has been correctly nominated, has signed at the respective places. Reporting the serious and the routine adverse events, I'm sure that all investigators are very much aware of the importance that not just the FDA, but even our drug controller gives this particular event reporting so much of importance, especially the timelines, where you'll have to notify the ethics committee, the sponsor, as well as the DCGI within the respected time frames. We also, during the audit, pre-audit, clear up, we noticed that there are so many adverse events which are going, and then, they don't have stop dates. We will have to be very careful. If there are some events which you have given a start date, you have to give a stop date. And this, once again, can become a flaw. It would look like you just close the trial with some ongoing AEs, and then you don't know what to do when the inspector comes and detects these unclosed adverse events and other things. As I told you already, the regulatory documents, which includes the study protocol amendments, whether they have been approved by the IRB, all the sponsor correspondence through emails or letters, and all the SOPs, everything needs to be there in hard copy along with the site master file of all the subjects. And you have to really look in and see whether the investigational product accountability, the devices and their accountability records are all accurate, complete, and whether they are current. That is most important, including the calibration, whether everything is current, would be seen quite diligently by these inspectors. Was the appropriate study monitoring completed by the sponsor? Was the monitor's communication with the clinical investigator placed on record? And the monitor's evaluation of the progress of the investigation, everything has to be placed on record and in the file. And this is something what the FDA inspector really looks for when he is coming. So once, let us say, the inspector has gone through all these things, there are, what happens really after the inspection is there could be an exit interview. It's not there could be, most of the times there is an exit interview where the inspector sits with the investigator and sometimes the entire team and shares his opinion. And this is how we got the first opinion, what I had mentioned earlier regarding the coercion factor. If deficiencies were found, a written form FDA 483 that is being given to the clinical investigator or his representative regarding the deficiencies. Then the FDA investigator prepares a written EIR, that is the Establishment Inspection Report. The 483 and the EIR or copies of any materials collected during the inspection and any clinical investigator response that has been received by the district office are all forwarded to the appropriate FDA center for further evaluation and a final classification of the inspection outcome. So this is a model of the 483 form, and 483 just doesn't mean that the trial has not been done well or you're a bad investigator or something. There's nothing to get disappointed. It is just an observation, and you still have a chance to give a clarification for the 483 that has been raised by the investigator. And there is an FDA response to the inspection, a letter that generally states the FDA observed basic, they either can say that they observed all the basic complaints and then there was no 483 issued for the site and everything was as per norms. There can be an informational or an untitled letter that identifies certain deviations and, statutes and regulations that did not meet the threshold of regulatory significance of warning letter, saying that there were some deficiencies and need correction. Or if there were serious deviations and repeated, observations of violation, then there can be a warning letter. And, when this happens only when there is a regulatory significance. These are some of the common deficiencies that the FDA investigators have observed. There is failure to follow the investigation plan, or the protocols have not been properly supervised by the investigator. Most of the time it is by the delegated persons. There have been too many protocol deviations and they have not been appropriately notified and classified as major or minor. Record keeping is inadequate. Inadequate accountability for the investigational product. Please remember, this is of two types. One, the products which have been used during the trial, or if the trial has closed, there should be accountability and, the samples. In most of the bioequivalent studies, sometimes the sample of the IPs are archived. They all have to be according to the compliance as per the local regulatory authorities like DCGI. They will look at the retention samples also. So this is a form that can be downloaded from the FDA website. I'm sorry, it is very small, but it is a systematic form. And then just before the inspector comes, it is better that the site downloads these forms and with the help of the sponsor goes through each and everything diligently, because this is the form that the inspector brings and starts ticking off as he starts the inspection at your site. This is downloadable. Finally, our experience at Meenakshi Mission Hospital, Madurai, we've so far had 4 FDA audits, one in 2012, one in 2014, 16, and then finally 20. Luckily, we did not have any 483 that was issued in 3 of the audits, but in 2014, there was one 483 issued, and of course, we did reply, give the reply to the FDA. This was an observation noted in the retention of the IP storage. It was just then that the DCGI and the FDA had allocated that a third party is supposed to take care of the retention samples, and the retention IP storage should not be done at the site. And it was just about a month earlier that, maybe about a month or 1.5 months earlier, that this regulation had come in place. So when the FDA auditor came, he found the retention IP storage at our own place, archived at our place. So he said that this is not as per the current government norms. So this has to be followed, adhered more strictly, and there should be a third party who has to be allocated for storing the retention IP. So we gave them a reply and they did accept that it was a very short notice, and they did not take it as a very serious offense. And once again, apart from the FDA inspectors, you also have to remember that apart from this, the trial that is being audited, the FDA inspector can ask and for monitoring any other trial, actually any other the archival room, we'll have to check for restricted access. Once again, I did hear that in one of my friend's site, restricted access was not there for the archival room, and that was issued as a 483. So there should be a restricted access to the archival room, and you'll have to check for the entry logs, the method of the storage of the study documents and its credibility. Although what I tell you may sound small, presence of fire extinguishers. This has been issued as as a 483 in one of the forms, that there was not enough fire extinguishers at the site. Identification number code for each stored boxes. The storage period for the institution and for the clinical trial purpose, we will have to cross-check it with the site SOP. If there is a mismatch, that can be a 483. Similarly, in the IP storage room, you will have to check for restricted access. You have to check for the entry log, the method of storage of each IP, whether the calibration date of each instruments are live, and whether they are in working condition. And then you will have to cross with and check with the data loggers that whether the temperature log has been maintained. Because suddenly when the inspector comes and then checks the data log, and if he finds excursions, then you will find yourself at, you don't know what to tell him at that point in time. So these are certain small things which can take you, surprise by surprise when the inspector is at your site. And of course, always FDA inspectors will have no reaction on their face. So you don't know whether they are happy with you or whether they are sad with you, and whether, they are going to give you a form, a 483 or whatever. So it is always better, you expect that most of the things they would find mistake with you, and then, you can go ahead and check and keep everything in place before the FDA inspector steps into your site. These are, of course, other than the FDA, that these are the other agencies, our own CDSCO, the local office or the national office can come to your site at any time, especially if they find that there are a lot of serious adverse events and the gross protocol violations are there. The Health Products and Food Branch of Canada, they are once more an agency, and the EMA, which we've not had an inspection, but we've heard that the EMA is even tougher than the FDA to manage. So these are the other regulatory authorities who can actually come to the site for inspection. So I think I've just comprehensively covered whatever we did for our FDA audits. If there are any questions, I can take. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. I had a few questions. Other than FDA, did you have any other regulatory authority?
No. We've had DCGA come in. That was like a surprise check. But we've not had, in one of the phase 1 studies, when the DSMB had observed certain, findings. This was early on, sometime in 2010. We had the DCGA who also just came to see whether all the AEs and the SAEs were all notified properly. Luckily, our site didn't have any problems. But we've had only FDA come in 4 times.
One more question is, it was asked in chat box also. Like, do you have to intimate sponsor of the trial that they
Actually, surprisingly, what happens is the sponsor is the one who brings you the information. See, what happens is as soon as the FDA is going to come to your site for inspection, some of the sponsor actually sniffs and finds it out first. Every time, in fact, there have been a lot of false alerts. The sponsor will say that sometime next year, you may expect an FDA audit, because they get first-hand information, and the moment they are sure that there is going to be an FDA audit in India, the sponsor does all the sponsor auditing and the cross auditing, everything they do. Actually, they come along with their for cross auditing also, they arrange and they make sure all the SOPs are in place. But as an investigator, at the end of the day, we are responsible to give answers to the FDA. So at the end, we'll have to be really very alert as to when they are going to come and all. But usually the sponsor is always with us, just before and after the audit.
One more question, after your experience of FDA thing, we do trials, we don't go and see the IP and everything. So I'm part of ethics committee, so I went to site, I saw everything. But when we are doing as a investigator, do you regularly go and see on site this, all the at site management office?
See, honestly speaking, we don't have the time to do all that. But actually, what has happened is after the very first audit, we got the system in place. So till the time we had, independent CRCs working for independent investigators at various departments. The clinical research department was, established after the first audit, and thereafter this has become a routine checklist. So whenever, as the trials are going on, you keep checking all these data loggers and you look at the temperature variations. All these things happen on a routine process, and therefore, actually, to be honest, it is not on the burden of the PI. In our hospital, since we have a huge clinical research department with the independent managers and all that, they do all this work. But as even Sahu sir mentioned, at the end of the day, it is our responsibility. Whatever happens, the sponsor will intimate you. As sir correctly mentioned, sponsor won't be there by your side during the audit. He will be there unofficially, he will be there, cross audit will happen, they will make sure that everything is in place, CRFs are in place, everything is corrected, everything is, pakka in place. But when the FDA comes, most of the time you are going to be facing the song alone. They won't be by your side. So I think, as sir mentioned very rightly, it is, at the end of the day, the investigator has to take care of himself and his site.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. I think we'll come back after some time because there's a session for question answers.
Yeah.
And I think I would call our next speaker, Sadashivudu sir. There is a medical oncologist and faculty head of the Department of Medical Oncology in Nizam's Institute. I have been interacting with sir for a long time, and the topic which sir will be covering is handing over the ongoing clinical trial. As a senior is retiring or left the job, so you have to take over PI. Basically, we are looking in the experience and the issues which we need to address. And I think I'll hand over the session to sir. Sir.
Thank you, Dr. Vinayak, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to share our own experiences. That's the most important thing, I think, what you have mentioned. Yeah. So really, there is one thing, whenever our boss or HOD or our senior is there, sometimes we'll concentrate more on clinical part. We never thought of to share something like responsibility in a clinical trials. So what happened is that Dr. Purvish sir asked me to talk about this topic. Really, I think, yeah, I have faced some problems during this time because suddenly Dr. Raghu sir taken up as a TMH director in Vizag. He's going to retire he's going to take the charge of that institute within 1 month. And another one is my younger faculty, Dr. Vijay Gandag, also he left. Both of them at a time they had left. I was alone in the department, and we have to take over all the academic as well as this scientific drug sponsored clinical trials. So I think first thing, I think recover from try to recover from the shock, because both and the younger faculty is the daughter is something, she was very unwell. Unfortunately, he left the institute and went to US for treatment. Suddenly, I think both the thing mentally and physically, and as well as other things, also very shocking for me at that point of time. I had to take care of clinical things. I had to take care of clinical things with patient burden. We have to take care of academic also, because we have residents and we have to take care of their academics in terms of teaching, thesis evaluation, and next one is administrative also. As a HOD, I think we have more responsibilities. As a something junior faculty, we may not concentrate much on that. As an HOD, again, we have to attend the meetings, take care of that one. Ultimate research, again, whatever clinical trials I was doing at that point of time. So these are so many issues suddenly I faced at that point of time. But of course, I think as we have to go adjust the system, and we have to go according to that. And at that point of time, we have a good academic clinical trials. For example, we started cancer registry by ICMR. The problem is that all these trials is, I think, at least 1 month prior, we have to intimate them the PI change, and we have to take the permission from the ethics committee. And we have notified to all the people actually before have to take over that one. First, we have to intimate them by mail or something like that. We were academic trials at that point of time. This cancer registry was a big program actually. We started with a big note. And the pediatric cancer, some treatment patterns from GENUINITY Foundation. There was some NGO. They were sponsoring one clinical trial and study actually. They have to enter the data and everything. And Indox, that India plus Oxford, we have the collaboration with that. We have some clinical trials. And the ICMLF and Indigo, we have some to establish molecular lab. We got some grant. So these are academic things, and we were trying to establish. Suddenly, I think both of them they left. I had to continue all these things. It's a big problem for me to communicate with those the sponsors, communicate with this other organizations to take over this as PI. And institute also again give a letter that okay, this person is going to retire and he will be the, because I think as you know, whenever we have something any clinical trial agreement, we have bipartite agreement and tripartite agreements. I think we know all of us, especially this coming to the sponsor clinical trial. At that point of time around, I think there's around 8 years ago, we have some restriction of clinical trials, not more than 3 to 5 per single individual. So again, a problem I faced because I can't take how many clinical trials I want. Again, the restriction in clinical trials, only 3 sponsored and 2 are academic. So again, I had to go back and already some of the clinical trials we completed, but only the follow-up was going on. And again, one more responsibility is that we have to restore the documents for 15 years. I did not even know that how many clinical trials were conducted in our department and how many trials were there at that point of time. The storage documents are important. Whenever they got some like an FDA investigation or something, any other people they'll come for inspection. We have to show the source document without any problem. So these are all things I think that completely just I think new to understand because we never involved in that part of clinical trial and to take more responsibility. Boss is there, the boss will take care of everything. We thought in that way. In that way, I think within 1 month, I had to communicate, we convince ourselves first whether I can continue all clinical trials with these rules and regulations at that point of time. And I had to convince our institute also because if the more clinical trials are there, they'll think that I think no, we have to concentrate on clinical. All your boss is left, you have to take care. So we have limitations in this. Again, I had to convince our institute that we have completed some of the clinical trials. Just we are doing the follow-up, and we'll also close the clinical trials within 1 or 2 months. Just again, I communicated with them. I had to close 1 or 2 clinical trial follow-up. Just already they're finished, but some documentation work was there, unfinished work. I had to complete that one. And again, the change of PA name to communicate to the IEC is the most important step here is again the CT agreements and everything. We can't just take whatever I want from my senior, just like a letter, just take over this one. But we have to intimate to the ethics committee that changing over the PIs, because I was not part of some of the clinical trials as co-PI. So co-PI is there, something is no problem. But once I the P, not a co-PI, it's a very big problem. Again, I have to go through the EC and our executive registrar. We have some institutes, some SOPs, but luckily all of them, I think they convinced that because there's a dire emergency. But the problems are minute problems, but it took me at least 2 to 3 months to settle each issue. Communicate with the people, again departmental activities, and myself I have to do some trials already going on. And I think I said clearly the restriction was limited clinical trials, completed some of the clinical trials, documentation as early as possible. And now what are the present status? Almost we completed those follow-up clinical trials. Okay. So the continued academic clinical trials, there is no limitation. Just we could convince our institute that the academic clinical trials can be continued without any problem. And 3 more direct sponsored clinical trials we added recently because again we started doing the clinical trials. Is not a, so this trial site was one of the best centers at our Raghu sir. He did phase 1 clinical trials in India first. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. This center was established and excellent. I think the FDA inspected this site number of times. He did not get a single remark something on the inspection site. So such a center established and to continue the same standards, I think it was really tough time for me. All of them, again, the most of the coordinators, they left off because of that clinical trial restriction. There were not many clinical trials So some of the coordinators, they left the job and they left. One or two coordinators, they left along with Raghu sir. So problem is only one senior coordinator was with me, and because of him, I think I could able to continue all the remaining work. Still, I think we have to retrieve the trial documents. Because of that, one senior coordinator, and we should involve to take care of this all other purpose. Because as a clinician, we have many things to do. But apart from that, as a research methodology for people who are learning in this one is, I have some solutions. Just please, you should take part in clinical trials as OPI, even though you are not taking part actively. But since you are, all of us, some of the students are listening to these lectures, take part in the clinical trials and learn the things how to submit your document. It is committed to the FDA approval, audits, and everything, and we should know each and everything. Take the active part to face any if anyone can face any such situation in the future. Luckily, SOPs in the department institute were existing at that point of time, so I could not face any major issue because most of my colleagues, other departments, is a multi-specialty hospital, other departments are helpful and they coordinated things in a smoother way, and good research wing with experienced coordinators. Even though one senior senior faculty is getting retired, but try to have the good coordinators who has the experience, who conducted the clinical trials in the past. Definitely, they will help us to run the show in a smoother way. So always try to build up the good team. The teamwork is most important. The only problem is the whole team left. It's very difficult. But luckily, I think some of the clinical coordinators were with me, and they could continue the remaining work. So without any major problem. So these are the simple things to learn from our side. And because my topic is very limited topic, what I faced is I experienced, I learned many things, and now with these experiences, now I am requesting all my junior faculty to take up one study each as a PI or co-PI. So all of them now we are sharing all the clinical trials are academic or sponsored. So with that, when if I get any problem or something, if I leave this institute, the other people also will take the part without any problem. So involve them as a co-PI. We can include number of co-PIs in any clinical trials. That doesn't matter. So try to incorporate them, involve them as a co-PI, build up a good research team, and the coordinators will help us to run the show in a smoother way. So thank you for this small opportunity to share my experiences. With Vinayak, Dr. Purvish, sir. Vinayak, your mic is off.
It is delightful to hear your experience, sir, because I think you had really big shoes to cover. Sir, other day I was hearing sir was telling so much into the academic trials, registry. I think you've done a phenomenal job. So one of the questions I have, sir, I
Yes,
don't know
please.
it's institute actually, but some of there'll have a financial issues also will be there when the PI leaves. There are few trials where I have sent to some other places where the PI left the thing and then they continued. There a lot of thing was there, but in your institute it will not be there. So what is it?
No. Actually, yeah. Initially, when the 10 years ago, the principal investigator, the money will come to the institute. Institute will deduct the 22% of overhead charges. The remaining amount they will transfer to our in departmental account. That was there in the past.
Yes.
But later again, the problem is because their problem in the finances, again, it will become a big issue. What they are doing is now, all the money is with the institute only. Just again, we don't have any right to take the money, but we can take a 50 at a time. We'll get 50,000 rupees as a sum amount. We'll spend that amount and we'll collect the vouchers, and every time we'll again submit the bills or the vouchers, and this what I can say, one pro forma to the institute. Institute will audit that one. So money is not involved. We are not. It will not go along with the PI. It is belonging to the only institute.
No, sir. I think in between some time, it came that the PAN card of PIs will be used. I mean, just I'm trying to experience so that.
No, I think we don't have that one. Everything now bipartite agreement. Institute and sponsor will sign on the clinical trial agreement. Okay, so we don't have any financial agreements with the any other what you can say sponsor or any other agency.
Second
So
point
PAN
is.
card, yes.
Second
Please,
part is
please.
indemnification, sir. Like, for example, that I mean, I'm not talking in this context. I'm just telling the previous PIs. Anything actions is there. How you will take it, and I mean, how
The
to.
professional indemnity again, everything is again by the institute will take care of everything because luckily we have the government institution.
Yeah.
So we have the professional indemnity or the clinical trial agreement. Clinical agreement also we have this compensation. Everything is taken care of the sponsor, or if anything is wrong, the professional indemnity will be taken care by the institute only. As a person, we don't take much responsibility because the money is going to the institute. We are not taking anything personally.
No, it's not always true in all the places.
Yeah, but the government institutions we have that. I think to me now, to my knowledge, maybe I may be wrong with some other
Actually,
people,
last
but
there's
yes,
one
yes.
more question, sir, which I was when I had went for a fellowship for 6 months to Singapore. I had 2 PI. I was there, so I was just going through the FDA. So if you're not available as a in PI in a same country for more than 90 days or 6 months, I can't remember the exact timeline. I had to hand over the PI to co-PI. So it is can be temporary also, even retirement no, but sometimes if you go for sabbatical, you have to hand over the PI responsibilities. I think I will.
That law, I don't know exactly that law. I don't know, but anybody there is there. I think they can.
Sir, I think I will call the next speaker, sir. We are on little on short time. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So I will call Dr. Chirag, sir, to for the topic for next session, which is how to become medical monitor for clinical trials. Sir is very right for this talk because sir was among us. Sir had a most experience in a clinical trial research before he actually started practice. Sir, we are handing over the session to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Vinayak, and I believe I am audible, right?
Very much audible, sir.
Very good, thank you. So my topic is how to become a medical monitor. So in last couple of talks, we listened about how to face the US FDA or for that matter any regulatory audit. And then we went on to listen about how to hand over and take over the charge as PI when a senior is leaving the institute or when you want to hand over the charge to a junior, when you are relieving your duties as the principal investigators. Now, at many points in time, when we are conducting the clinical trial, we require the medical help from the sponsor side, and that help is being offered by the person that is called medical monitor in the clinical trials. So, as Dr. Purvish had aptly said, that in my talk, I am not going to involve any theories or any guidelines. And what I'm going to discuss is about my personal perception about what medical monitor is supposed to do on behalf of the sponsors. So who are the various stakeholders in the clinical trials? So of course, patients, investigator, the site staff, the ethics committee, the regulatory authorities, and then finally CRO and the sponsors are the important stakeholders in the clinical trials. And what would a medical person do in the conduct of clinical trials? So the medical person can be working on the sponsor side or on the CRO side. And on the sponsor side, one can be a medical director who is the expert in that particular therapeutic area, hopefully. Then if the sponsor does not have the medical expertise in that particular therapeutic area, they will invite a few steering committee members who are the known experts in that particular area. For example, if it is a breast cancer study, some of the international breast cancer specialists are involved as the steering committee members. That is being done by the sponsor. A medical expert can be the data safety monitoring board member who will look at the data on ongoing basis. And then there is a medical monitor who will coordinate between all these three people. On the CRO side, there is a medical director who is the expert in conduct of the clinical trial, not necessarily the expert in that particular therapeutic area. Then there is a medical monitor who is allocated to that particular clinical trial. And then there are a trial medical officer who are working at a junior level. So what I am going to discuss today is the function of medical monitor, who is not the senior-most person in conduct of that clinical trial, but nonetheless he knows so many things about the clinical trial, and he can be a very resourceful person when the site is conducting the clinical trial, as well as when a sponsor as well as CRO is conducting the clinical trials. So most of the clinical trials in our country are managed by the CROs. So I will discuss the function of medical monitor of a CRO. So role of medical monitor. So the role of medical monitor starts before the trial actually starts. It can be on the ongoing basis when the trial is continued, and it can be at the end of clinical trial. So before the clinical trials, so medical monitor has to understand the disease that is being treated. For example, if it is the lung cancer clinical trial, he has to understand how lung cancer is being treated. I mean, he does not have to understand only that protocol and that particular drug, but he has to understand all the options that are being utilized in treatment of lung cancer. He has to understand the study drug very clearly. He has to look at the preclinical studies. He has to look at the phase 1 and phase 2 clinical studies if it is a phase 3 clinical trial. And he has to carefully look at investigators' brochure. He has to be familiarized with all the known adverse events of that drugs. He has to aptly know about how the study drug is to be utilized. For example, if it is the immuno-oncological trial, so what concentration has to be there in dilution, whether it has to be given in the routine plastic IV set and IV bottle, or it has to be in a special bottle, and with all the reasoning about why the particular thing is being done. So if a regulatory authority or if the investigator asks the medical person, that medical monitor has to be available and aware with the answers. He has to understand very clearly the protocol, and he may be involved in the medical writing. What I often tell my clinical trial coordinator is that if the investigator is asked to prepare tea, for example, he will put the vessel on a burner, put some milk and water, put some tea leaf, sugar, and maybe some adrak, and then he will prepare the tea and serve the tea to the people. But if clinical trial coordinator has to prepare the tea, he will have to ensure that proper flow rate of the burning gas is utilized. The vessel size should be appropriate. He has to put 180 ml of water and 40 ml of milk. He has to put 8 grams of tea leaves and 12 grams of sugar. So he has to be very particular. And the medical monitor has to know about what is the size, what is the quantity, and why. So that is the need of medical monitor in the clinical trial. He has to help his medical writing team in preparing the ICF with writing all the available options for that particular disease. He has to understand how to narrate the possible adverse event to the patient in the language the patient can understand. He has to prepare the regulatory dossier. So with the regulatory department of the sponsor or CRO, he has to be working very closely. So he has to give the background of the disease being treated, background of the drug being offered, and then he has to justify each and every point of the protocol about how the drug is being used, how the drug dose is to be modified, how the patient has to be withdrawn from the clinical study, and how and why the adverse events are being monitored. He will look at the feasibility, and if the medical monitor is looking at the feasibility, he will look at the drug, he will look at the protocol, whether the drug can be utilized in the country or not. If I am to look at the protocol for melanoma, I will not be very happy to do that because that is not a very common disease in our country. If the protocol looks at alveolar soft part sarcoma, I should know that there are very few patients of that particular disease, and the protocol has to be prepared for multiple types of sarcoma, including that type of sarcoma. So this sort of things has to come from the medical monitor. Then the investigator may have many medical queries about how and what is to be done and how and what is not to be done. And the ethics committee also may raise some of the medical queries, and the medical monitor has to be able to answer those medical queries. And then finally, against the IEC, Independent Expert Committee set up by the DCGI, the medical monitor will make the regulatory presentation. That has to be very good medical presentation, based on which the trial may or may not be approved by the regulatory authorities. So after the ethics committee approval is obtained, and after the DCGI, or for that matter US FDA approval has been obtained, the next thing is to initiate the sites. And before the site initiation, there is usually an investigators meeting. The investigators meeting used to be occurring at the exotic places in past, but now since last few years they are being organized in one of the metros in our country, and in the last year it is being conducted on Zoom or WebEx meetings. So at the investigators meeting, the medical monitor will present the clinical protocol. He will explain each and every aspect of the protocol in reasonable detail with all the investigators. He will answer the queries of the investigator which might arise at the time of investigators meeting. If the investigator feels that there are some ambiguities in the protocol, if there is something that is not clear, he will try to clarify those issues. He will put the clarification letters along with the protocols. He will try to ensure that with those clarification letters, the protocol is not to be amended, because amendment in the protocol is the nightmare for the sponsor, for the regulatory authorities, as well as for the investigator. A lot of effort has to be put in to ensure that the protocol amendment is in place and implemented. And there are many, as I said, the medical monitor is not the oncologist in the oncology clinical trial. So if there is something hardcore oncology that the medical monitor does not understand, he has to escalate the medical issues with the medical directors of the sponsor or the CRO, and in the clear word that what the investigator wants, and he has to get that particular answer. At the initiation meeting, he ensures the comprehension of the protocol and the procedures by the entire study team at the site. He addresses the ground realities at the site. So protocol might want that CT scan has to be done every 6 weeks. If he goes to the site, if he realizes that the CT scan appointment is not available for about 10 to 15 days, he has to ensure that for the trial patient, the appointment is being taken well in advance. He has to ensure that the radiologist is well versed with RECIST criteria. He has to ensure that the laboratory is capable of giving the reports like EGFR and ALK and so on and so forth. See, many of these things, many of the compliance issues will be addressed by the CRS, but there are few things which a medical person will have to be involved in. And this is what a medical monitor will be doing. He ensures that the site is ready with everything to enroll the patients, and he helps the CRCs at the site and CRS in the CROs in ensuring the comprehension of the protocol. So I have assumed that the investigator has read and understood the entire protocol clearly. And I see the smile on some of the faces, and I believe that this is not happening quite often. So we have to ensure that the investigator also is well versed with the protocol. He has read the entire protocol at least a couple of times. If he has to do the study successfully without any deviation. While the study is ongoing, the medical monitor interacts with the sponsor and the investigators to ensure the ongoing clarity. If required, he issues the waivers, and at every investigators meeting, it is loudly and clearly said that the waivers will not be issued from the inclusion and exclusion criteria. But there are often the time points where, because of the lack of clarity or because of lack of understanding of the clinical trial protocol or inclusion exclusion criteria, sometimes the waiver may have to be given, and that has to be justified between the medical monitor and the investigator. I will give an example of patient approval. There was a bevacizumab biosimilar trial from one Indian biosimilar company, and I was the investigator in that study. Now, medical monitor wanted to approve every patient before we could enroll the patient, where the clinical details of that particular trial was being given, and then the monitor will look at those details and will approve or not approve the patient for the inclusion in that trial. So in one of the patient, the BP written was 160/80, and the medical monitor, without talking to me, he rejected that this patient is having uncontrolled hypertension. Now the patient was taking 20 milligram of olmesartan and 2.5 milligram of amlodipine at that point in time, and I had to argue hard with that medical monitor that this is not uncontrolled hypertension. This patient is hardly taking any antihypertensive therapy. Patient should be enrolled, and we will ensure that patient's hypertension is controlled in due course of time. Otherwise, we will withdraw the patient. Now, medical monitor's concern was correct that if BP cannot be controlled, the patient may have some side effects. But it was easy for me to control that hypertension with the help of my cardiology colleagues. So these sort of things should not happen, and we have to ensure that medical monitor is also understanding the protocol appropriately. So as I said, medical monitor is usually not a subject expert, and the investigator also will have to clarify a lot of things with that medical monitor. Safety assessment. So this is a very important job of medical monitor. So if there is SAE, often it is the nightmare for the study coordinators at the site and also for the investigator, because every SAE will result in back and forth number of queries after Parikh pe Parikh. So that is if an efficient medical monitor is involved when the SAE is reported, he will look at the narratives very clearly about what exactly happened and what sequence it happened. He will ensure that the narrative is presentable to the regulatory authorities to derive the causality and the associated actions. So if a duly trained medical monitor is involved, he will ensure that the safety assessment is being done very well with minimal number of queries. So the medical monitor is the resource person with the CRO or sponsor who is expert in GCP, who is also expert in the protocol, but may not be expert in oncology. He interacts with the site, that is with the investigator, the CRCs, indirectly through the ethics committees as well. He interacts with the sponsor, and he interacts with the regulatory authorities. So I may have missed a few tasks that a medical monitor carries out, but this is my perception that what medical monitor is expected to do. And if some of us want to take up the job as medical monitor, I think we are, as oncologists, we are overqualified to be the medical monitor. But we may have to work closely with medical monitors in many of the clinical trials that we are performing. So Vinayak and Dr. Parikh, thank you very much for involving me in this discussion.
Thank you, sir. I think we have to stay a little back. We'll come back with questions. I'll finish the last session with Dr. TP Sahoo, sir. Sir will be talking about experience of his and other people where there are a lot of issues. Maybe it may be the clinical trial part. It may be the part where regulations issues will be there. Part with sometimes with NGO. Other day, sir was talking about. I would call sir to start the session. Sir, over to you, sir.
Yeah. So I'm audible, Vinayak?
Very much audible.
Yeah. So thank you, organizers, and to the last part of the day. This will be a very practical thing, and these are lessons which could be called bitter, could be unfortunate also, and some of the things which I have told, and each one of the experience which I'll be telling is a true thing. I will be hiding the names because of the issues that are involved. And I have participated in more than 40 odd multicentric trials, and most of them have been the international multicentric trials. I have stopped doing it for some time now, slowed down. and the experience of some of these are mine and some of are from friends and seniors. So let's see what I can make out of it. It's more of a practical topic rather than anything to do with any standard protocols. So a clinical trial, as you know, can see that it is involves a lot of stakeholders. You have a study participant, you have the study team, you have the CRO, you have the sponsor, you have the IRB, you have the regulatory authorities, and the study team itself is of multiple persons. You have the principal investigator, you have the coordinators, you have the research nurse. And apart from that, there are many who are involved who are not part of the team, but you work in a hospital setup. These persons also sometimes can be helpful to you in doing trials and sometimes can be a nuisance. So let us see what we do with it. I'll go topic by topic. I have 8 to 10 slides. So first is with ethics committee. And this is something is very, very important, that ethics committee is such an important thing. And I think the job is so very important from every aspect, not only from the safety of the patients, but sometimes ethics committee questions and answers can be very tricky. And sometimes this, you feel that it's a nuisance question. So I'll put you one part of what happened with one site with the ethics committee. This was a trial which happened very recently, which was a advanced non-small cell lung cancer. It was adenocarcinoma which they recruited, and they went ahead and gave those who were not amenable for curative resection or radiation, pemetrexed and carboplatin. They, by principle, the trial agreed to recruit anyone who was not having a driver mutation. So the pemetrexed carboplatin was there in the standard arm and also in the experimental arm, plus you had another drug in the experimental arm. So this was the trial. So everyone was receiving the standard of care at that point of time. Even today, this will be a standard of care. So look into some of the questions, and this really smells of you are in a big soup how to answer this question. One of the question came down to the PI that this is a phase 2 drug trial, non-inferiority type, which is to be carried out in stage for non-small cell patients. Subjecting this terminal ill patient for this type of trial appears undesirable. So you are really in a soup to answer that anyway, the stage 4 cancer will be incurable, they will be terminal ill, but these are the patients who on which trials are conducted. So to run a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, any of this trial will have these patients. Second question is that this had that the empty vials, and a lot of investigators are there, and most of us have been audited by FDA, EMEA. So we all know that you have empty vials which patients carry on, and we come back and then take the accountability of these vials. So the ethics committee puts down a question that empty vial methods of compliance check and domiciliary treatment does not satisfy. Means you did give the chemo and there was a nebulization thing which they need to do at home, and they need to come back with the empty vials. So they told that you need to keep the patient admitted for the whole period of 3 months to run this trial, because you cannot do it on a domiciliary care. And this is something so very tricky. Then you have the PI has to go back, talk to them and speak out that this does not make sense because this is approved and this is a trial approved by the Drug Control of India. Last was something which I found very tricky, and I thought this could raise eyebrows on how things sometimes can go bad. Proposed efficacy study parameter, which was non-inferiority for this, they told because you are expected to recruit, this is a small trial, 4 to 6 patients. How do we know that your patients are benefiting from this? So basically the PI had to go back with a lot of answers, especially telling them that this is a multicentric trial. The trial results are put together and then only the things happen. So my point of saying is that you can have your bad days with the ethics committee answering sometimes which you feel sometimes are very, very silly. Second, some colleagues, if they're a member of VC, this has been taken from someone who's a junior of ours working in an academic institute. They can be hindrance. It means some of the seniors who are not in well tuned and in fact nuisance. The junior colleague of ours told that the investigator was the he in question was told because we were running a trial on neutropenic patients and he was doing it on a neutropenic diet, that whether fruits and vegetables do matter. The EC told him, the ethics committee, that you have to wash the fruits yourself and feed it to himself. Means he has to feed the fruits directly after washing it nicely and not delegate to anyone. And the PI has to do it in himself and feed the fruit directly to the patient. This really spells of nuisance, and this can be a big bitter experience. Whoever has gone through must have had a very bad time, and sometime would have laughed on this. Even I would like to hear in the question answer session. This happened to me quite a bit of time. We are in a private setup, and most of us do earn and have PI fees, and which is our right, because we do it on a check basis. We pay our taxes, and we have every right to pay this. And sometimes it becomes a big issue in the institute and even in the ethics committee. I've heard it myself in some of the ethics committee coming, you earn a lot of money out of these trials. That is why you are doing trials. See, this is where the mindset really comes in, and this becomes sometimes a very bitter experience. So this is something which I feel is very important. So what I need to tell you is the need is for a fair, knowledgeable and scientifically sound EC. That's something very important, because the examples which I showed, each one of you can go back, and sometimes the question really are very you feel, what the hell is this question? How do I answer this? Such a silly question. This is a point number one. Number two, from colleagues. You can have a lot of bad experiences from your colleagues. Again, a colleague of ours who was doing academic trial in an academic institute, one of the reputed in India, he was doing a trial on AML. Can you believe it? A senior from the surgery side complained to the ethics committee and ICMR on a formal note that this PI has done an unethical inclusion criteria of low platelets. An AML patient will be having most of the time a low platelets for inclusion criteria. This was induction trial. So this also has gone through, and the PI had to write down to the EC and ICMR telling you that the disease itself has a thrombocytopenia. This could be one of the bigger things which people have failed. Well, last part from that colleague who called me up yesterday complained about the delay. Means these colleagues were sitting. There was a patient of a trial who had a cardiac arrest. The team went on to do a CPR. Normally what we do is we do the CPR, we revive the patient, or otherwise whatever happens shifts to the ICU, and then we start putting the notes. That's all of us do that. None of us start writing the things and the CPR goes on later on. First we do the country, and then the notes were seized, and he told that I had to tell the hospital that, see, I was doing CPR, how can I write a notes while performing CPR? Now coming down to sponsors. This was something which I feel depends upon how do we read our contract. A very dear friend of ours was recruiting patient for multiple myeloma. Daratumumab with Dexona was the protocol. Elderly male developed septicemia, and all of us know steroids can play a role in this part with 70+ patients. The patient was admitted to ICU, luckily recovered with a bill of 2.5 lakhs. The sponsors, MNC Giant, refused to cover the same, telling that daratumumab did not cause the septicemia. So my take on this is, I never have felt it myself. I always make it sure that I write into the agreement that any adverse event or SAE, irrespective of causality, will be covered, and you have to respond. You have to reimburse the thing. If you do not read through, sometimes we're busy, we do not go through the contract, we just look at the main points. This sometimes can land up in trouble, and this is a big issue. Another friend required emergency, so one of the patient required emergency surgery during study period, discussed with CRO and sponsor phone. It was decided by them that it will be covered under the trial money, but they had a telephonic conversation, no email documentation or anywhere documented. Later the sponsor just withdrew. So the take home is, whatever you do it, go back home, mail it down that this is what was discussed, and that is how you could save a lot of your bitter experiences with the sponsor, because most of them are usually money related. This one happened with me when I was leaving one setup and going to the other. I lost quite a bit of money on remuneration of the dues in a timely manner, because I was okay, comfortable, recruited the trial big time. So there was at least I lost 1 or 2 lakhs of rupees just because I did not follow up on the timely manner of the money remuneration. I think these are something all of us should remember. This is very important. This happened last year. Few of you would have known it, few would not have. This is a non-oncology study, and this is a true things which has happened. A PI from Ahmedabad does a phase 3 study on atopic dermatitis. the site notes the values based on atopic dermatitis severity index. That's how they note it on the severity index. The drug effect on the atopic dermatitis severity index. The values did not correspond to the efficacy spike for the tested product. Means the drug which there happened and the values which was noted by the PI somehow did not match and the efficacy was not met. Sponsor influences PI to change the score. This actually becomes a fraud. But this happened. This comes through because the PI does not stand his or her ground. The FDA audit happened, which was for 10 days in July 2019, fraud detected, and the site and the investigator has been blacklisted. So this can happen. This is one of the worst bitter experience one could have, but I feel here the PI is to blame. You as a medical head cannot and should not yield to the sponsors at any point of time or the CROs, because they are going to do their job. They are trying maybe push through some false things, but ultimately, as was discussed in FDA, it is your thing. You are to face the music. I think here this happened last year, just few months back. Another just happened some months back during the COVID time. There's a clinical study report which happens. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but when the trial completes, there's a small data which comes through which you have to approve that this is the data, this is what it is, this was a trial conducted, this is the efficacy, this is the toxicity data. You look at your side, but that's how you look at it. You also sign on it. Then it was given a one day. You just see the PI got it in the evening and had to sign it by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning under influence of an Indian sponsor. Usually it's not a trend. You have to again stand your ground. What happened is the PI told, I have just lost the confidence in this drug and also the sponsor. So this can be a bitter experience, although no legal, but I think as a PI, you should stand your ground. That's what something which I feel is so very important. This happened to one of our seniors who's here in this webinar. What happens to a trial subject for death on day 31? Chirag bhai is there. Maybe in the discussion we can take this on. This will be a very important thing. AML study. Subject dies on day 31, and all of us know that normally 30 days is the follow-up period. On day 31, if it is something that is there, what I got it, if there is something that is persisting, then that is continued and the SAE or adverse event is continued till the resolution. That's what the normal trial tells you. But if the one day the PI was adamant, he files SAE, the sponsor does not accept that. And sponsor tells, no, it is one day later, I'm not going to accept it. This is not trial related. The PI was adamant, it is a drug related event. Just a one day would not tell the site was terminated. The list goes on. It happened to me. It was a phase 3 multicentric trial, one of my 2010 trials. There was a multicentric, the French sponsors, one of the biggest company of France, 764 had come to India for a drug which did that time. I don't know how many of you have done this trial, vinflunin, which was something of an analog to vinulbin plus capecitabine versus capecitabine. I had recruited some 8 or 9 patients. One patient of that died, and that was on the capecitabine arm B. That raised the alarm. Internal audit was done. Audit, nothing was found. They just came down. The previous hospital which was working had a more of a government look, government setup. No hazards, no infections. The adverse event was basically a drug-related progression of disease, not a drug-related. The patient died because of the progression. That also documented. The lady from France came down and told, please stop recruitment without any valid cause. I wrote mails, but nothing was written back. I think because I was leaving the site, I did not pursue it, but knowing my nature, I would have pursued it till the last point. And I had even threatened I'll go to DCGI with this, but this is not how you do. You just cannot stop recruitment just because you find this does not suit your 5-star hospital setups, because that is not what was inclusion was. Otherwise, you should not have chosen this site. So these are some of the experience which I feel does land up us in a lot of bitter experiences. And this you feel, which I felt it was not fair to me. I did the trial, recruited a good amount of patient, nothing was a mistake. And then you come down and tell, okay, it looks more of a government setup. The last which I have faced is the media. And who can forget the 2009-10, where that's when the Bhopal MP thing came in. And I was the person with highest number of clinical trials in Madhya Pradesh. And doing oncology, I had most number of patient death during trials. And all of them, most of them, 99 were due to progression of disease as stage 4 cancers. Luckily, I was not in the eye of the storm. Indore was in the eye of the storm, and the Bhopal Memorial Hospital was in the eye of the storm. My message is, this is a very tricky issue. I live in an area where I don't know where the NGOs come from, because probably of the gas tragedy, there are a lot of NGOs, and they have this attitude of just making issues out of non-issues. And this is what happens. And I was hounded actually for 6 to 8 months by multiple medias. Even I had a interview done I don't know how many of you know that. Actually, Times Now came to me in Bhopal, did a pre-interview for half an hour, and you cannot refuse them because I have the stop. Then they told this will go to Arnab Goswami, and if they feel that you're not done right, then you have to be in the prime time show. I said, okay, please. As usual, all of them feel we are doing the trials wrong. I answered all the questions, and I never got a call to be on prime time. That's why none of you have seen me on the prime time. So this is that it is that media can be a double-edged sword. It can make good use. You can make good use of it, but otherwise it is something very, very bad. And I can tell you from 2010, recruitment and trials in Madhya Pradesh took a big hit, and that has happened and impacted India. Recently, the only acquisition came for vaccine trials from Bhopal again from the same group who did the BMHRC issue in 2010. And today's paper, it has come out that the person who died, unfortunately, had alcohol, large amount of traces in the viscera. And the family is accused he's a teetotaler. So either you believe science or you believe what is in the media. So I don't know whom what to believe, but what I felt is this is something practical issues most of you would not have dealt with. But because I have been in the eye of the storm, Madhya Pradesh and Bhopal, I've gone through it. I've been asked for interviews by Al Jazeera. I can go on and on and on. And one of my EME audit, which happened to me, as lucky I went through the audit, was because I was in Bhopal. The sponsor told, we just cannot find a red flag. Why they chose you? They chose a site in Jaipur and chose me in my. And when the audit was done, everything was okay. Then the auditors told, we came down to site because we have read so much of bad things happening in Madhya Pradesh, and you were one of the highest recruiter, one of the trials. We told, let's do this visit for you. So that's what it can run up to. So lessons: document, 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 and document. That's the only way which can save you. What you did, most of us as Indian doctors only do a lot of things, do not document. Please document, timely manner documentation, and document with date and time. Stand your ground. The PI from Ahmedabad, I feel sorry, and just should not have done. He or she is equally to blame, but should have stood his or her ground, should not have buzzed to the sponsors, because ultimately he has been blacklisted. And fight for yourself and the patient. I think these are the two most important things that I could think of. And before I end, World Cancer Day, 4th February, I am and I will, and all of us have put lovely videos on the Facebooks. So let's now go on doing and create awareness about the cancer. Thank you, Vinayak. Thank you, Dr. Parikh, for this wonderful thing, which was very, very atypical. I just had to ask friends, colleagues to give me some cases which I can put up, and all of them which I put forward are true cases or true incidents which happened. The last which I want to end off with is that the ethics committee which happened was actually my ethics committee, and one of the members, not the members, one of the colleague of ours in that hospital complained to the drug controller, for which I also, thanks to him, went through the DCGI audit. And I came out in good colors, because there are a lot of false accusations which fly. So what I can say is, anyone from the patient, from the colleagues, from anyone in the trial members, from the media, from the regulatory, can be a nuisance if they are unethical, if they are corrupt, and if they do not have the right idea about trials. Because most of the patients still feel, most of the persons still feel trial is something which we are doing for experiments, it's unscientific, and we only earn money out of it. That's how it is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was very enlightening, as well as we were wishing for more episodes than actually it ended abruptly. But I think you have spoken very nicely. It's a documentation, I think, and a little bit of anticipation. Any other questions we have, Sir Purvish, sir?
I think Sahu has done a fantastic job. And this is what is normally swept under the carpet. So the fact that he has brought it out so nicely, and all the participants who are here will benefit immensely, because now they know what are the pitfalls and what we should do. And I think his concluding slide where we have to stand our ground, I think it is very important. We have to have a spine which will make sure that the sponsors or anybody else cannot, just dictate things. So, Sahu, awesome work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Vinayak, I could have done more, gone on, if you all would have contributed to my response, because I did my experiences, and some of us, even sir, has contributed one of the slides which I showed.
Yeah, it's really nice actually. So there are other issues which we not touched actually. Sometimes study team, I just told colleague, I assumed it is not from medical oncology. So there will be a lot of issues when trial starts, especially if you remember the time when there was only 3 trial restriction was there. So there was like a shadow PI. I mean, like there was a PI for namesake, and then there was a different financial arrangement. So there will give a lot of trouble for the junior colleagues that time. So I mean that actually it was good decision because a lot of us got hands-on as a PI for most of the trials. Otherwise, usually trials was done by very people who have their own setup, or in institute 1 or 2 people used to do the trials.
Others can share their experience if they have anything now, right now also, because it's open for.
So Sahu, if I can.
Yeah, please.
So in one of the chronic myeloid leukemia trial, where the study drug was dasatinib, before it was that dasatinib could cause pulmonary hypertension, one of our patients did develop pulmonary hypertension. And when the clinical study report was being written, the sponsor was not ready to accept that patient as being pulmonary hypertension, because the pulmonary hypertension was diagnosed based on the symptoms and the echocardiography finding as given by our cardiologist. The patient was treated at that time when the CSR was prepared. Patient was treated for pulmonary hypertension already for about 1.5 years, and the patient had improved from that pulmonary hypertension. But the sponsor started quoting the American guidelines about diagnosing pulmonary hypertension, and the electrophysiology study must be done, and the pressure studies with cardiac catheterization should be done, and this and that. Everything was being told by the sponsor, and not accepting that the event was pulmonary hypertension. They said that it was something else. It was not pulmonary hypertension. The PI was Dr. Sandeep Shah, who is my colleague. He, as you said, used the word stood the ground, and he refused to sign the CSR without that event being categorized as pulmonary hypertension, which eventually the sponsor did. So this is one example where we have to stand our ground so that the patient can be saved from the potential harmful effect of the drugs.
Dr. Krupal, can you hear me?
Yeah, Vinayak, hi.
You have questions to ask.
So nothing. So I was just wondering, I mean, like, just wanted to share another experience of mine. So, I mean, like, basically, at our institute, we didn't have a trial coordinator. So there was a lot of running around. There's a lot of paperwork to be done. So we had to get in touch with our sponsors to ask them for a trial coordinator. So they said, and the reimbursement for the trial coordinator then actually became an issue, because the institute said they wouldn't actually provide for the trial coordinator. So then who actually ends up reimbursing the trial coordinator? So that's something which I had to face as well. So I mean, like, any sort of similar experiences from the others as well on that?
For me, Sahu here, for me it was easy because I worked in a private institute, and I think I gave my PAN card, and I had collected money. A part of the institute, 20% of my things of the whole trial, or 30% depending upon how the budget was calculated, used to go in a separate thing to the institute. Rest, I had my trial team. At one point, I had a trial team of 18 persons. So one thing I want to tell you is, when speaking, if you want to run a trial, and if you want to have adequate number of trial, you should have good coordinators. And that is going to save you a lot of things. You might give more 20, 30, 40,000 more per month, but ultimately it's going to save you a lot of money otherwise. They are going to do a lot of groundwork for you. Most of us learn it a hard way. If you learn it early, the people who are listening, if they want to start things, do not keep a short team. As you expand, try to get your team very nicely and pay some of the study coordinators nicely, handsomely, so that they are with you for a long time. That's something which I feel all of us will tell you as they have gone through. For your case, I think institute should pay. because the institute was taking the money.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I mean, like, all the, I mean, like, the
One more thing
actually...
which I want to tell you my experience. I have been always against to the CRO, the sponsors of CRO appointing one for their trial. That I feel
Correct.
as an investigator, I'm very, very against. Lot of your secrets of your setup goes out, which you don't want to go because he's a part of your team unknowingly, unknowingly. I always tell, no, it will be my team. You pay money for every month for my study coordinator and put it in my PI fees. The distribution is very clear. I do not allow anyone from outside just because for that one trial to be there. I had one bad experience. There's their nuisance actually, big nuisance.
So
Absolutely,
Sahu,
absolutely.
taking your earlier point about hiring the right people and ensuring that they are retained, we had two separate sessions earlier in this course, and I think both of them were really nice.
Yes.
I think few discussions happening about PI fees. I think Purvish sir or TP Sahoo sir can. I think we did a session on negotiation with the CRO and sponsors. What we understand is the money comes at site SMO and the PI and the team. Can we have a little bit? Right, sir? Either Purvish sir or Chirag sir or TP Sahoo.
So if I can initiate,
yes,
most of our studies we are doing at my own clinic, that is Vedant, where I am one of the directors, and the income goes to our institute. But then a number of trials we are doing at another hospital, which is a corporate hospital, where hospital is taking its overheads to provide all the facilities. The institute is taking the of the study coordinator that has been designated in the study budget. But the institute also wants some part of the money which has been earmarked as the PI fees. And I'm okay with that because the institute is allowing me to use its patients, it's giving me the infrastructure and everything. But then I have to be and I have to discuss with the finance department and the directors or the administrator of that institute to find out that how much of my fees I want them to take away and what they are going to give me and when. The time part also has to be defined, and we have to ensure that that happens. They have to allocate the person to track the invoices, to track the payment received from the sponsors, and for the investigator as the payments from the sponsor. So it has to be on a case-to-case basis from every investigator with every institute. There is no fixed rule, as Dr. Parikh had written in the chat box. But we have to ensure that the conduct of the trial is beneficial to the institute as well as to the investigator and to the science as well.
Fine, so that will be really good. Any other questions? Gupta?
So there was some discussion about the negotiation of budget as well as looking at subtle points in the investigators agreement, and indemnity. Indemnity was something that was discussed at some point in time. So whether it is a bipartite agreement or tripartite agreement, we have to ensure that the sponsor is indemnifying the institute, its staff, the investigators, the coordinator, as well as the ethics committee. So that word has to be there. And except the willful scientific misconduct or medical negligence, everything has to be covered by the sponsor's indemnity. That has to be there in every trial.
Thank you, sir. I think we are closing the session. Sir, Purvish sir, last words, then we can close.
No, I think we had very good and intense discussion. So I look forward to the rest of the program as we move forward.
Thank you, sir. And I think we have tomorrow last session, and it will be covering the few of the more relevant topic, and it will be focused on PI, how PI and CRO, what each other's need, So I would welcome all the speakers to join tomorrow also, so that we can have more healthy discussion. Thank you, sir. And I think we'll close the meeting, sir.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.